Okay, so once again, today we are going to be talking about positioning and grid system. Just like the way we talked about the flex layouts, another type of layout that you can use is grid layout. But apart from this grid and flex, there is some time you want to move your element around on a page without really using this flex. Or it's not even possible. There's no way you can do it with flex, and there's no way you can do it with grid because you are shifting element from its original source to a different location on the page, and it's going to maintain wherever you put it, or it's going to be there, but if you scroll, it's going to scroll along with the content there, and that's where the positioning comes in there. For example, now if I go to a site online here, so for example, like this site, if it is using it, if you look at it as I'm scrolling down, the content at the top are not leaving that particular section there. As I'm scrolling, you see that this content at the top is still there. It's not scrolling with what is going on. Again, to the content by the side, it's not scrolling at all. So what is going on here? What they are using is the positioning properties to kind of achieve this layout that you are seeing currently like this. So when you want to have a content, but you don't want that content to move from the location that you place it, you are going to be using the position property there with the value that you have to use, which I'm going to show you in today's class. So, but if you look at the content at the top, this doc, the CLI, and some other content that is there too, so they are not moving at all. The same thing with what you have by this side. As I'm scrolling, the content at the top here is not scrolling at all. They are just there uh, where they are being placed on this screen. So how do you do something like this? You need the position property in order for you to be able to achieve this kind of functionality using your CSS, HTML, and for now we don't have JavaScript, so what we'll be using is the HTML and the CSS there. For example, to look at this site here, so look at this site here too, look at the site here. So look at this header at the top where there is this logo and some other links. As I'm scrolling down, you see that that content is not, or that header is not leaving that particular area. It's just there, but other content are going up or down. As I'm scrolling, the content maintains its original location. This is positioning property, like position property is working here. So with that position property, you can't do what is going on this side. Again, to look at uh this circle that is by the bottom right there. As I'm scrolling, that stuff is not moving at all. It's just here. So it's still positional property that you're going to use to do something like this. But when do you need grid? Grid is really useful when you need to work with both rows and column at the same time. Don't forget, when you are dealing with flex, you can only work with one direction. So whether you use column or you use row, but you cannot use both of them at the same time. But there's some UI that you need to control both the rows and the columns at the same time there. So if you want to do something like that, that's where the grid is going to come in there. But most of the time, what you always use is the flex that we talked about. But if you look at it now, this content on this page is using flex, and it's only one direction that this thing is being worked with there. So if you look at it on the page, we have the container, and inside the container you have the left items, because all this one they are by the left, and again too you have the image by this side. So this is flex here, but what type of direction you are using here, or it's being used here, this is row, because the content here is placed side by side with the content on the right hand side there. So here now, what is being used is the flex, but now the direction is row. But what if the screen is small? Which direction are they using? You just see that the only thing they are just doing there is to switch the direction from row to column, because that's what you always do on mobile. On mobile, you only stack items on top of each other. Look at it now. You see that it's not looking good for this screen size. But now if I reduce it more, they should have a place it them. Can you see what is that going on? So the content are now placed on top of each other there. So when you're dealing with a small screen, you always stack your content. And when you're on a bigger screen, when you have enough space, you always place them side by side in this form. So, and how do you achieve this kind of a design here? You need the flex layout. But at some time, you want to display items side by side, and at the same time, you want some of the item to be vertical there, and that's where grid comes in. So grid now, you can use it to work with both rows and column, and you can control them separately without affecting the other direction there. So you are going to see all this thing when we start using the flex. But the first one I'm going to talk about is positioning, which allows you to move content anywhere we want it to be, or make the content to be positioned at a particular place. And when it is positioned at that place, that's the only place you are going to see it. It will never leave that particular area where you position the element. And as you can see from this header of this side, this content here now is positioned to the top, and it will never leave that particular side there. So it will always be at that top section. The same thing too, this one that I mentioned here, which is by the bottom right, this one too is positioned here, and it will never leave this place. So whether you scroll down or you scroll up, it will always maintain its original location there. And how do you do this? You need a position property in order for you to be able to do something like that. But when you're using position property, we have different values that you can supply to this property, and based on the value you are supplying to it, we determine how it's going to work. So let me click on go live to load this page so that you can see different types of value that you can supply to position the position property, and based on the one you are using, we determine how it's going to work. So let me wait for this thing to load. Yeah, so as you can see, uh, we have positioning and we have the grid system. But first, I'll be talking about the position property, which is used to lay your elements to a different sections or to different section on the page using any of these particular value there like that. And based on the value you are using, we determine how this your element is going to be shifted on the page depending on the value that you are using with the positioning property. So let me go to the CSS and we can start with this. But first, let me do this basic reset so that we can see some of these things properly. So the padding should be 0, the margin should be 0, the box sizing should be border box, which is what you always do every time you are working with the CSS, because you want to remove some of these unnecessary property that this browser is using by default. So we are removing all the padding, removing all the margin, and at the same time I'm putting the box sizing to border box instead of it using the content to calculate the stuff. If you want to, you can update your font family, but now I don't care about the font family. We really want to show what is going on the screen. So yeah, I'm going to have the background to be RGB. So the red should be 250. This one should just be 200. This one should just be 10, like this. So I'm waiting for this thing to load. Okay. Don't know what's with VS Code these days. Just keep wasting time there like that. So let me wait for this body to load. Yeah, so as you can see from my screen, I have this background there for the body, and inside the body I have the main element. So let me quickly lay out this thing. So I'm going to have display of flex, which is what you know already, which is going to place the content side by side there. Which content is it going to place side by side? We have the image and we have the text. So all the text will be by the right hand side, while the image is going to be on the left hand side, because that's the way I structure my content on the HTML file. So if you look at it, I have main element. Inside it, I have header and I have a section. So since I'm displaying this one as flex, the header will be by the left and the next one that follows it will be by the right hand side, which is how flex property works in CSS, like that. So what do we want to do today? What we want to do, the first thing is to use all these different types of position that we have there. So the default one is the static. And when you say static, it means it's not moving at all. So any element that you are generating on the page, by default, their position is going to be static. So which means the way you arrange the element in your HTML, that same way it is going to come out on the screen. So wherever you place whatever item that comes first, that's the same thing that the HTML is going to arrange first on the page. But at some time you want to move your element to a different position on the page, or you want to even remove them from their parent and take it to a different place entirely, and that's where these positioning properties comes in there. And we have different values that you can use with this positioning property. One of them is this static, which is what is there by default, but you can change it to relative. We have absolute, we have fixed, and we have sticky. And I'm going to be explaining each one of them one by one, and when do you need it, and how to work with each one of them, like that. So let me move this thing to the center. So we have these align items should be, don't know what's wrong with my VS Code, just slowing down these days. Okay, it's loading. Let me save. Then once I'm done with this class, I'll need to restart my system. So okay, as you can see here, we have this static, we have relative, we have absolute, we have fixed, and we have sticky. So when do you use static? Static is always the default. As static is always the default. So which means the way you arrange your element on the page, that same way they are going to appear on the screen. So I have this H1 first. That's the reason why it's coming first on the screen. If I move it down below this P tag, you see that it's going to be the second item, and then followed by this unordered list. But at some time, just like the way what I mentioned before, you want to move your element to a different position, even though the element is inside the header, but you want to move it to a separate page later on, because without the help of this positioning property, you cannot do something like this. Look at this design here. If you look at it, we can see all the content when you have enough space. But now when you have a small screen, what you see that what is now coming out is this button here with this image. And once you click on the image, can you see what is happening? The way the content are positioned now is different from the way it is on the big screen. Here now, you see that the content are now covering the entire screen, and the way it's covering the entire screen is not where you position the element. The element is inside the header, but when it is on a mobile screen, as you can see, it covers the entire page. But how do you do something like this? You need to use position property, because without the help of position property now, you can't just move this element out of this parent here. It's supposed to be here, but because we are dealing with a mobile screen and the content cannot really fit into this area, what do? You make sure that you shift it from that place and you place it into another place, and you arrange it the way you want it to be so that it looks nice on the mobile. And once I go to a desktop now, and since we now have space, as you can see, everything is now back to their original position here. So when it is on mobile, everything covers the screen in this form, and when it is on the desktop, you see that everything goes back to this area which is inside the header. So how do you position your element? That's where this positioning property comes in. And depending on the type of the positioning you want to do, you are going to call the correct value for the one you are trying to do there. So we have static, we have relative, we have absolute, we have fixed, and we have sticky. This site currently now is using fixed. And based on the name, fixed means that element, wherever you take it to, it will always be there. So and whether you are scrolling or you are not scrolling on, it will always maintain that particular position there like that. So let's start with the first one there, which is the static, which is what I mentioned that it's always the default. Even if you don't use it, that's what the browser is using by default for all the elements on the page. So all the elements on the page by default are static, which are going to be positioned the way you have them in your HTML there. So let me select the first box. So let me select the first box so that you can see this thing in action. So first of type. So let me give this one a background of red so that you can see what I'm selecting. The padding should be around that 1 rem. So this one is going to have a display of flex direction. So flex direction is going to be column because I want everything to stack on top of each other. The gap, that means the spacing in between each one of them, is going to be this 1 rem. And as you can see here, this is what I'm doing. But what did I want to do here? This one, the item that I have here, I want to position it to a different area. I want to take it to a different area. So what do I do? So let me target it. So first, again, first of type, that is h1 inside it. So let me give it background color so that you see that it's actually targeting the element. So let me use blue for it. The color should be white and the padding should just be around this 1 rem. So if I save it, it should kind of target this h1 that we have inside this red background. So by default, all elements are positioned as static. So which means where you place them in the HTML, that is the same place you are going to see them on the page. But what if I want to move this element to this section here, to this bottom right of the page here? So you can use other positioning property here to do that. So by default, we have this position property, which is having this default value of static. So if I save it, you're not going to see anything static. You're not going to see anything because this is the default value that all elements are using there. But when you start using this relative, absolute, fixed, and along with the other properties that works with them, that's where you start seeing that this element will be shifted from its original location there. So we have static, and if I save this in, if you check it again on the page, it will always have its original position there. But apart from this static, we have relative. So this relative behave like static, but the difference between them is that you can shift this your element from one location to another location using the offset property. So when you are dealing with static, static will always maintain its original location and you can shift it around using any of the offset property that I will be introducing to you later on or soon there for this relative. So with static, it's always going to maintain its original location wherever you place it. But with this relative, it behaves like static by default, but you can offset it. What I mean by offset is you can move it from left to right, from right to left, from top to bottom, and bottom to top using any of these offset property that I'm going to bring out right now. So we have the right. This is one of the offset property, and this one is what you can use to shift element from right to its opposite side, which is left, when you are using positive value. And when you are using negative value, it will pull the element close to its side there. So when you are using positive value, it will push the element from the side that you mentioned. So because you can actually mention right, you can mention left, you can mention top, at the same time you can talk about the bottom. So these are the offset property that you can use to move your element around. But before any of these offset property can work, you have to display or you have to position your element apart from this static. All this offset property doesn't work with static because it's always going to maintain its original location with static. But if you want to move your element around, then you have to use any one of these value apart from this static here. But the way each one of them work and where you are going to be using them are different, and I'm going to be explaining each one of when you need to use relative, when you need to use absolute, when you need to use fixed, and when you need to use sticky, because it's not just use them anyhow, you use them at the appropriate place there, like that, depending on the design that you are working on. So with relative, by default it behaves like static, so which means it will still maintain its original location, but you can now move it around using any of these offset property, which is this right, left, top, and bottom. Another, the last one is this inset, and this inset is a combination of all these value. So if you want to apply the same value to all of them at once, you can actually use inset. So inset will give the same value to right, left, top, and bottom at the same time. But for now, I will not be using this inset because I want to give them different values so that you see how this thing is going to move around based on these offset properties that we have there. So we have the right, we have left, we have top, and we have bottom. And anytime you are working with any one of them, when you use positive value, it will push the element away from that side that you are using, the offset that you are using. And if you use a negative value, it will pull the element close to the side that you mentioned. Don't forget here, if you are looking at this element, so if you are looking at this element, this is the position of the element. Let me use another color. So this is the position of the element here. So which means the top of this element, the top of it is going to be this. So this is the top, this is the left, this is the right, and this is the bottom. So when you now use any one of these offset property, when you are using positive, it will pull close to that side there, and when you are using positive value, it will push away the element from that side. But when you are using negative value, it will pull the element close to the side that you are using from where this offset property are there, like that. For example, here now, if I want to work with the right and if I use positive value, it means this thing here now, it's going to pull, or it's going to push the element from the right. So this is the right. Currently the element is at 0 from this right, it's at 0 on the left, it's at 0 at the bottom side, and it is 0 at the top side here. So now if I use a positive value, maybe like 3 rem here, which is 48 pixels. So what I'm saying here is that since I'm using positive value from this right, I want to push it away by this 3 rem value. So if I save it now, you see that the element, can you see what is going on? So the element is going to be shifted away from the side of the offset that you are using when you are dealing with positive value. So wherever that element is before, you can shift it around by using any of this your offset property. But when you are using offset property, the position must not be static, because with static it will not work. Static is, you know what static means. The element will always maintain that same position no matter how you are changing this offset property. As you can see, it's not working. Right is not doing anything because the position is static, which means the element must maintain its original position where you type it in the HTML. But if you want to move it around to any other location on the page, you can either use this relative, absolute, fixed, or sticky. But each one of them have the way they are working based on the one that you are interacting with there. So the first one I'm interacting with right now is relative, which behave like static by default. So which means if you don't use any of the offset property, it's going to maintain its original location the way you arrange it from the HTML. But you can actually shift it around by using any of the offset property that I have here, like this. So we have the right, we have the left, we have the top, we have the bottom. And how does each one of them work? So when you are dealing with right, when you are using positive value, it will push the element from that right to the left when you are using positive value. And as you can see here now, the element is shifted from right towards the left by the value that I specify. But assuming I'm using negative value, then it's going to pull the value, it's going to pull the element instead of pushing the element away from its offset side that you are using there. So since I'm using right and it is negative, you're going to pull the element towards the right by this value that I'm using. And if I save it, can you see now the element is going towards the right because I'm using negative value. But if I'm using positive, it's going to push the element away from that side of the offset that you are using there. So this is right. So this is how right works. So instead of using right, if you know that you want to shift it from the left towards the right, then instead of using the right, what you just do is that you use left. So the left now will do the opposite of what the right is doing. So each one of them are going to do the opposite of the other side that is facing them. So now if I'm using positive with left, so instead of it going to the left now, it will now be pushing the element away from the left. Since we are talking about the left offset, as you can see, it's now pushing the element away from the left. But assuming I'm using negative value now, then it's going to pull the element. It's going to pull the element to that side, which is this left side. As you can see, the element is moving to the left. And if I use a bigger value, you see that the element will move away from its original location like this. So if I use maybe like 15 rem, which is this, or let me use 25 rem, it's too small. Let me use around that 45. No, it's too big. 25 should be okay. So if I save it now, you see that it's going to pull the element away from its original location by this. Can you see now? This is the original location of the element, but now it's now appearing by the side of the browser. So we're able to position element to another place using this relative. But this is not relative that we used to do this in, because that's where we used to use it. But you can actually offset your property, offset this your element by moving it from left to right, right to left, top to bottom, or bottom to top by using any of these offset property. And if it is positive one you're using, then it's going to push the element to the right. Since we are dealing with left and the opposite of it is right, then it's going to push the element towards that side. As you can see, we can't see anything because the element is now outside of the screen. But now if I expand the browser, you are going to see that it's actually moving away from that particular position there. And that's how this thing work. So if I wanted to go out a little bit, so I can just use this 5 rem instead of that 25 rem. The same thing too, you can do it for top. So now what you are doing here is now you want to be offsetting the element from top downward when you are using positive value, and when you are using negative value, then you are pulling the element towards the top side. So here now if I use 4 rem, it's going to shift element down. Yes. Is there anything you want to talk about? Hello. Okay, so as you can see now, the element is shifted downward from this up because it's calculating the value from this top. That's how I have to draw this line. So the calculation of this 4 rem is starting from here, from this place down to the position where you want it to be. So it will start from, this is 0, so it will keep moving it down until it gets to this 4 rem that you are seeing down here. So this 4 rem means that the element is here by default. This is the top. So this is the top. This is the top. So this is the top. But now what you are saying here is that you want to shift this element downward by this 4 rem. So don't forget, positive will push away from the offsets that you are using, while negative will pull it to the side of the offsets that you are using. So if I use this one now and just replace this 4 rem with minus 4 rem, it means now the element is not going to come down. So from its original position of that top, then it will keep pulling until it completes the minus 4 rem that is here. And if I save it, you'll see that instead of it going down, as you can see now, it now pulled the element upward close to the side that you mentioned. So positive will come down when you are dealing with top, negative value will go up. The same thing for the left. Positive will move towards the right, negative will move towards the left. The same thing for the left or the right. So any side you are working with, if it is positive value you are using, it's moving away from that side. And if it is negative value you are using, it's moving towards that side that you are using for the offsets on the page are there. So and this is how offset work. But the thing that you need to notice about this relative is that its original location is still maintained. Like this particular area that you have the element before you start offsetting it around, that position, this your relative will still maintain that location. No other element will take up that space. But there is some time, as you are moving this element around, you don't want it to occupy this space again. You want to remove it completely from that parent. You want to take it to another side entirely. You don't want it to be occupying the space that is useless. Because right now, if I remove this line, you see that that space now is now useless. So it will be nice if this one can just cover up that space, and that's where the absolute comes in. So absolute two work like relative, but the difference between them is that relative doesn't know, or this absolute doesn't have any space in its parent. Anytime you are using relative, it will maintain its original location, which is this circle or this box that I draw here. But when you are dealing with absolute, the first thing that the browser is going to do is that it will remove whatever space that element is occupying, and that element now you can now move it anywhere you want, but its space inside its original parent is going to be replaced by the other contents that you have inside that particular parent are there. So here now, if I save this in again with relative, the element is going to maintain its original location where you type it in the HTML. But if it is absolute, the first thing that the browser is going to use is that the element will be removed from its original location, and that space there will be removed too. And the element now doesn't know where it's coming from. It's going to be positioned anywhere inside its parent there, but you can now move it around anywhere you want using any of these offset property there. So if I save it now, you see that can you see what is now happening? The original location now has been occupied by the other content on the screen. So when you are using relative, the element still knows about its location, but you can move it around. That's relative. Relative knows about its original location. No other element inside that parent will occupy that space. It will still be there, even though you are moving the element around on the page. It will still maintain, or it will still have that its location inside its parent, just that you can offset it around. But when it is absolute, which is what you'll be using a lot sometime there. So this one is really useful when you want to move your element around, but the original location is not going to be preserved, because the original location is this box here where I have this yellow box. But I don't want this space to still be showing, even though I'm moving the element around. Because right now, if I use this right, and if I use maybe like 12, you see that the element will be out of that box. And when the element is out of the, it's not even out of the box. Let me use 22, which will move the element outside of the box. So the element is outside of the box. Why do we need to have that space again? The element is actually out of here, even though this is where it's been typed from the HTML side. But now through the CSS positioning property, I was able to move it to a different location there. But as you are moving this element to a different location, when you are dealing with relative, the element is still going to maintain its original location. Can you see here? The space is still there. The space is still there because the elements still know that this is where it's being typed, and it will still preserve the space. So which means no other element in that parent that will take up that space. But we don't want to do something like this sometime when you are shifting your element around, because I don't want it to occupy any space again inside that parent. I only want it to be at that position that I want it on the screen, and that's where absolute comes in. So absolute behave like relative, so which means you can offset it around, but the difference there is that it doesn't maintain its original location again. So it doesn't know where it's coming from. So the browser will remove its space, and that space will be covered up by every other content that is inside that particular parent where the element is coming from. So now, if I save this one now, you see that the element now doesn't know where it's coming from again, and some other content has already taken over the space. So now the element is just free. You can now move it around anyhow you want, like that, by using any of this offset property again. But there's a problem with this one when you are dealing with absolute, the way the offset work, because there's something you need to do here. before it will work correctly. But let me explain the relative one so that I've already explained it, but let me go over it again before going back to that absolute. Anytime you are dealing with relative and you are using any of this offset property, it's calculating this offset property based on the original location of the element. So this is the left, this is the right, this is the top, and this is the bottom. So now when you say left, you want it to be 5 rem. What you're actually saying here is that from its original location, which is this is 0 here, you are shifting it towards the right, but what's the measurement there? You are using 5 rem. So it will keep shifting the element towards the right until it gets to 5 rem. But the calculation of this 5 rem started from this original location, which is the left of the element. But it doesn't work like that with absolute. So when you are dealing with relative, any offset property that you are dealing with, it will start counting the unit from there until it gets to the number that you specify there. So here now we're using 5 rem, which is 80 pixels. So which means from the left, which is this 0 here, we want to keep moving this element until it gets to the length of this 80 px here. So now if I save this one now, you see that from that left, that's when it's going to calculate. So from here now to here, that's where your 5 rem is. So that's the 5 rem. No, don't delete everything. So that's the 5 rem. So from here, this is 0. It will keep shifting the element until the left of the element get to, look at it too, until the left of the element get to this 5 rem, which is 80 px there. So it's calculating the value based on the original location of the element. That's how relative work. But when you are using absolute, it doesn't work like that, because first of all, the element doesn't know about its original location, and since it doesn't know about its original location, then how is it going to know that this is where it's supposed to start calculating the left, or this is where it's supposed to start calculating the right, or this is where it's supposed to start calculating the bottom or the top, like that. So first of all, once you display any element, or once you position any element as an absolute, the element will be removed from its original location there, and it will be placed on its parent there. And once it's placed on its parent, it's now left for you now to move it to anywhere you want. Look at it now. That space now has been occupied by this ul, because the element is now being positioned as absolute. And once you position it as absolute, it doesn't take up any space again in its parent. Other content will just cover up the space. And since the other content has already covered up the space, so how is it now going to calculate this offset? So this is how it works when you are dealing with absolute. This is how it works. So the offset is not going to be calculated by its original location again. The offset will be calculated based on its parent, or based on its closest parent that is positioned. So the way it works is that anytime you position any element as absolute, it will be removed. And since it has been removed from its parent, there is nothing like left again, there is nothing like right, there is nothing like top, and there is nothing like bottom. It won't be using this original location to calculate. What it's going to look for is, it's going to look for its immediate parent that is positioned. So it's going to look for any of its immediate parent that is positioned apart from static here. So any of its parents, and what do I mean by immediate parent? Because this it can be inside different parent. Look at it. The H1 is actually inside this place here, which is inside the box. But if this box is not positioned, it will check the parent of this box, which is main. If the main too is not positioned, it will check the parent of main too, and it will keep doing that until it gets to the body. And if none of them is positioned, then it's going to use body to calculate the left, the right, the top, or the offset in general. So this is how absolute work. Anytime you position any element as absolute, first of all, the browser will remove it from its original location, and every other content inside that parent will take over the space. And since the space is gone, so there is nothing like left, there is nothing like top, there is nothing like bottom, and there is nothing like right. So how is it now going to calculate its offset? So it's going to use the parent, the immediate parent that is positioned apart from static, to calculate its offset. So which means here, anytime you are using any offset property inside H1, it will go to its parent. What is parent? Which is this box. It will check whether that parent is positioned or not apart from static. Don't forget, every element on the page are always positioned static by default. So it will look at the parent. So if that parent is positioned apart from static, then it will be using the parent to calculate its offset. So which means it will be using the parent or the position on the left, right, top and bottom and so forth like that to calculate its offset. But if that parent is not positioned, it will check the parent of that one too, which is going to be main now. If the main is not positioned, then it means it's the main that it will be using to calculate the offset. So if the box is not positioned and main is positioned, it will skip this one and it will go to the main to calculate the offset. But what if the main too is not positioned? Because currently right now we did not position the main. As you can see, there is nothing like position under the main and there is nothing like position under this box. So which means none of them is positioned. So it will keep checking the parent. And what's the next parent of main, which is body, which is the final grouping element that we have there. And since the body is the last one, then it will now be using body to calculate the offset. Please, when you are dealing with absolute, it doesn't have any space again in its parent, and since it doesn't have space, it needs something to use to calculate the offset. So what it's going to do is that it will check its parent whether that parent is positioned apart from static. So if the parent is positioned apart from static, it's going to use it to calculate the value of all these offsets. That's what you'll be using to move around. But if the parent is not positioned, it will check the parent of that parent too, then it will keep doing like that until it sees the one that is positioned apart from static. But if none of them is positioned, it's going to the body straightforward. It will now be using body to calculate its offset, because now when I'm started doing this thing, so that you see that this thing are actually different, it will not be using this one. Oh, it will not be using its original location to calculate the offset. It will be using its immediate parent that is positioned apart from static. So for example here now, let me use left of 5 rem. What this thing is going to do is that because none of its parent is positioned, it will check the body, because the body is what it's going to be using. So this is now going to be 0 and it will keep moving towards the right until it is up to this 5 pixels, 5 rem here. Why is it using body? It's because its parent is not positioned there. So the box is not positioned, the main too is not positioned. And if you check the HTML, those are the immediate parent that you have there. So we have this is the H1. Where is the H1 located here? As you can see, it is located inside this div. And apart from that one too, it's located inside section 2. So the section is here. Then if the section 2 is not positioned, it will not check for the main. If the main is not positioned, then it will not check for the body. And since none of the other immediate parent are positioned here, then it will be using body to calculate its offset. So which means if I use 0, this is what it's going to use as 0, because it is the body now it will be using like that. If I say top, then it will be using the top of the browser to calculate, which is the body. And if I use right, it will be using the right of the body to calculate. That's how absolute position works by default. Someone wants to join? Let me admit. Who is joining me this time? So this is how it works. But if any of his parents is positioned apart from static, it will now be using that parent to calculate this offset. If none of the parent is positioned, it will go to body directly. That's how absolute work. Absolute will look for a parent that is positioned apart from static to calculate its offset, because it has been removed from its original location there. So let me put this in there. Let's see it. So now if I save it, you see what is happening now. It will be using the body to calculate all its offset. Like, can you see now? 5 rem. So why is it here? Why is its own 5 rem here? And it's because now if I change it from absolute to relative, you see that where their position is different, the calculation of that 5 rem is different. Can you see what is happening? When it is relative, relative is using its original location to calculate, because it knows about its original location. But when you are dealing with absolute, absolute doesn't know about its original location because it has been removed from that place. So what is it now going to be using to calculate offset? It will check its immediate parent whether they are positioned apart from static. So any one of them that is positioned apart from static, it will be using that one to calculate the offset. But right now, we don't have any of its immediate parents being positioned. So the div is not positioned, the section is not positioned, the main is not positioned. So that means the only thing that is left with is body. Then it will now be using body to calculate the offset. So which means now its own 5 rem is starting from body, not from the location that you actually typed the element. So when you're using absolute, the calculation of the offset will be based on its immediate parent that is positioned,
apart from static. Any of the parent that is positioned as static, it will not use it to, it doesn't use static to calculate. It only use parent that is positioned apart from static to calculate its offset. And since none of them is positioned right now, as you can see, it's now calculating the 5 rem from here, and this is where the 5 rem stop. But now what will now happen if I position the parent? So for example now, what if I position the parent as relative? Because I know that relative by default doesn't move outside of its original location. This is the parent now, the one that have this red background. So now if I position this thing as relative, which is this box here, which is this red, so this red now is relative. So now since I've already positioned it as relative, and this box now knows, I mean this h1 now knows that okay, its parent is position, then it will now be using the parent to calculate its offset. So which means when you want to calculate the 5 rem, it will start counting from here and it will keep moving until it gets to 5 rem. When none of its parent is positioned, it will be using the body. But when any one of its parents is positioned, it will be using the position of that parent to calculate the offset of the one you are using. So now if I save this one now, since the parent has been positioned as relative, you see that the calculation is now different. So it's now using the 0, this is 0 now, it's now moving towards the right by this 5 rem. When you are dealing with absolute, absolute doesn't have space again, and since it doesn't have space, it has to look for its immediate parent to calculate the offset. But if none of these parents is positioned apart from static, it will be using body, which is what it's doing before. So if I disable this positioning, none of the parent is positioning again, so it will disable the stuff, and you see that it's now using the body to calculate the offset. But if the parent is now positioned, it doesn't need to be parent alone. Oh. It can be, that's why I call it immediate. The immediate can be this, it can be this, because the h1 you can find inside box. Again, you can find inside section because the box is actually inside section. The same thing too, the section is inside main. So and the main is inside body. And since all of these things are inside each other, it means the h1 too is inside section, it is inside main, and it is inside body. Like that. So, and if none of its parents are positioned, then it will use body to calculate the offset. But once any of its parents is positioned, that's the parent it will be using to calculate the offset. And this is how absolute works. And the thing about absolute is that this one, it can move out of the way. So which means as you are scrolling on the page, it will scroll with it with content on the page. So let me add more content. So that you can see what I'm talking about. So let me add a p tag, and this p tag I'm going to use it to generate a text that is way long like that, so that we can have the scrolling icon, the scrolling bar on the browser there. What's wrong with this VS Code? I need to restart my system. See now. Oh god, this thing lorem 400. So it's going to generate the 400 dummy words so that it can create this scrolling bar for us, so that we're able to see that this, because the next one I want to mention, it work with this scrolling stuff. So the next one, which is that fix. So now let's wait for it to load. Is it up to, is it more than the page content? Is it more than the height of this stuff? I need to restart my system because this is that is popping out like this is silly. Okay, let me wait for it. We'll be able to treat grid like this. But this one serve is taking a lot of times already. But I was just thought, what's going on? What's going on? Let me pause the video. Yeah, so we have the content, and as you can see now, I can scroll down. But if you look at the content, it stays with wherever you are positioning it to, and as you are scrolling, it will be at that area, or it will scroll with you. So if you scroll down, you won't see the content again. If you scroll up, then it will come back. But there is other one that doesn't behave like this. So it works like absolute, but wherever you place it to, it will always be there. Whether you are scrolling or you are not scrolling, it will maintain that same location. Like that. But for now, this is how absolute works. So because I'm using left, it's moving the element to the left because its parent is position. But assuming the parent is not position now, it will be using the body to calculate the offset. So it will be using the body to calculate the offset. So which means here now, if I use top of 0, it means this element should stick to the top of its the box that is using to calculate the offset. So this element should stick to the top that is using to calculate the offset there like that. What's wrong with this thing? Ah, okay.
Sir,
So if you
maybe
look
you
at
should just restart your system now. I'm not
no,
seeing anything like this.
that will stop the video. So now, here now, as you
Okay.
can see, you have the top now. Since I'm saying top is 0, so it's now sticking to the top of what is using as offset. So yeah, let me move this element down so you can see what is going on. So this first box, let me just use margin top so that you see that it's not using the body. Once I position this one, I can't just stop the video. So it's something that is supposed to have been done before this class started. I do it now, that's the end of the video. So I don't want to be doing join whatever stuff. And the time is even going to. So here now, once I have the margin top, the element should be spaced at the top. And if you look at it right now, the top is 0. So which means it will stick to the top of the element that is using for its offset. So if it is left, you see that it will shift the element from left towards the right since I'm using positive. But now, let me position this parent. Once I position this parent, now you see that the way it's calculating is not different. So it's now using the top of that parent to calculate, and it's using the left of the parent to calculate its left offset. So this is how absolute work. Absolute is depending on the parent that you position apart from static. If it is relative, relative doesn't care about that. Relative knows about its original location. So the element is not removing from its original location. So since it knows about its original location, the element will be using wherever it is from the HTML to calculate the offset. And they can see here, this yellow box now is where the element is positioned by default. Because we are using relative, it will maintain that location, but you can still offset it around. But it will be, can you see now, it will be using it to calculate the offset like that. This thing has been shifted down because of this margin top. So let me redraw this thing. So let me take everything back to 0 so that I can see its original location again and draw it. Yeah, so this is the original location. So let me draw the box there again so that we can know wherever that element is by default. So this is where it is by default like this. But now I can offset it to any side that I want. So if I use 5 rem, you see that on the left, it will keep going towards the right. But the top is not moving at all because I said it should kind of stick to what is using to calculate the offset for the top. But if I use like 3 rem here, you see that from the top, it will go down by the 3 rem value. So the top is what is calculating that thing for. So this is the top, which is 0. So this is where it's starting from, 0, and it will keep going down until this top reach 3 rem. The same thing for the left too. It will start from here, it will keep moving until the left reach 5 rem that we have down here, because whatever you specify here, that's what it's going to be using, and whatever you specify here, that's what it's going to be using for the top. But it's going to be moving by this value. But what if it is absolute? Don't forget, absolute, once you position any element as absolute, first of all, the element will be removed from its original location. So which means this space here will be removed, and the next thing the element will now do is that, okay, you are trying to offset me, so what do I need to use to calculate the offset? So what it's going to do is that to look at its immediate parent, whether it is positioned apart from static. If its immediate parent is positioned, then it will be using that parent to calculate the offset. But if none of its immediate parent is positioned, then it will be using body, as you can see now. So since none of its immediate parents are now being positioned, then its top will be here, then it will calculate 3 rem downward. Then its left will be here, and it will calculate 5 rem towards the right. But what if I position any of its immediate parent? Then it will now be using that parent to calculate. So if I position this box now, it will not use body again. It now knows about its parent. So it will now be using that offset, or it will be using the box of the parent now to calculate. And since we've already positioned the parent, look at it, its top will be here. So which means it will come down by 3, and its left will be here. Then it will move toward the right by 5 rem. So the way absolute works is depending on whether its immediate parent is position or not. And the position I'm talking about is not static, or if it is static, it doesn't work with static. You only work with other position apart from static. And don't forget, by default, all elements are positioned as a static. Whether you specify position static or you don't specify it, that's the position that will be there by default. So if I save it, it's just as if you are not typing it at all. Can you see that it go back to the way it is before? Because now it doesn't work with static, it only work with other type of position. So it work with relative, it work with absolute, it work with fixed, and it work with sticky, but it doesn't work with static. So once the element position are static, it will not use that parent to calculate anything. You have to position the parent, and whenever you position that parent to, it will be using whatever that element is to calculate its offset. So which means here now, if I use relative here, I can offset this one too. I can offset this box. Maybe the left, don't forget, the left of the box is here. So the left of the box is here. So if I use minus 10 rem like this, it will be using, it will shift the element. Can you see? It's shifting the element, and that one too will follow suit, because don't forget, you shift the element. So that new position of the parent is what it will start using now. But if it is static, it doesn't use anything related to static. You only work with relative, you work with other absolutes, you work with fixed, and it work with sticky. So if its parent is absolute, it will still work, just that the parent too will be removed from its original location. Whenever you now move the parent to, it will follow the parent. So if I use absolute like this, don't forget the parent too, its own parent is on position, which is main. Then this one too will be using body. So which means if I use button to be 0, everything will go to the bottom side of the page, because now the parent of this one too is not position, and since the parent of this one is not position, it will be using the body to calculate its bottom. And what is the bottom of the body? It is down here. So again too, the h1 is depending on this parent. The h1 is depending on this parent. So since it's depending on this parent, this one too will follow that parent to wherever you position the element there, like that. What's wrong with this thing? It's still loading. So it's still, can you see now? So since the parent has moved to the bottom side, then that child too will follow, because it's using whatever the parent is, that's what it's using to calculate its own offset. So whatever the parent is, it will use that one, and it will now calculate its own left, top, right, bottom based on the element position, which is the parent. So but if you don't want to move the parent outside of wherever it is, you can just use your relative. Don't forget, relative will behave like static by default, just that you can offset it around. And that's what you always do later on, anytime you need to move any element to a different area on the page. But the element can still scroll along with the other content. So that's where absolute comes in. So absolute, once you position any element as absolute, the first thing the browser will do, it will remove it from its original location. So which means inside that parent, it will be removed. The space there will be occupied by other content. As you can see, it's not occupying any space again. But if I return it back to relative, then it's going to maintain its original location, and that space will be preserved. And again, you can now offset it around. Most of the time, the one you need is absolute, because you don't want that space to still be there, and you want to move the element to different area on the page. And once this thing is saved and load on the page, you see that the element is going to maintain its original location once again, but you can still offset it. But if it is static, you cannot offset the element. It will always maintain its original location wherever it is. You cannot shift it around, but there's still a way of doing it by using transform property. But here we are talking about position property. So the next one we have there is fix. The next one we have is fix. Because now let me return this thing back to absolute, and let me offset it. So this left now, let me offset the left. And if I offset the stuff, okay, the parent is positioned, I want to use the body. So I'm not positioning the stuff. So look at it now. As you are scrolling, the content too is scrolling. But what if you want to do something like this? What I show you on this site here. If you look at this site, where is it? Okay, where is it? So if you look at this side, as I'm scrolling down, this header at the top is not moving at all. It's just positioned at that place. So how do you do something like this? This is what we call fix here. So fix behave like absolute, but the difference between them is that the fix doesn't scroll along with the page content. The fix doesn't scroll along with the page content. So the anytime you position any element as a fix, first of all the element too will be removed from its original location, but its own calculation is different o. The way it calculates its offset is different, but it behave like absolute, which means it will be removed from its original location. So if I save it now, it will be removed from its original location, but now as you are scrolling it will never leave that position. This is fixed. As you are scrolling, it doesn't scroll with the content. It will maintain that position wherever you place it, which is what this site is using here anytime you want to do something like this. So anytime you have content and you don't want that content to move, what you do, you position it as absolute, and wherever you place it, it will always maintain it. Look at this chart icon here, this circle down here, and this header. Both of them, they are not moving at all. Whether you scroll up or you scroll down, they will always maintain that same position where you place them. So fix doesn't move at all, even though it will be removed from its original location, but it doesn't move. Wherever you place it, that's where it's going to be. But how does the offset of this one work? So this one work with the screen. Please, this one work with the screen. Anytime you are dealing with position of fix, e doesn't use the parent to calculate offset o. Whether you position parent or you don't position parent, e doesn't care about the parent. E always use the screen to calculate the offset. So which means the stop is here. So when you are dealing with um when you are dealing with this one, so let me change the color. When you are dealing with fix, his stop is always here, his left is always here, his right is always here, and his bottom is always here. So he's using the screen of the browser to calculate offset. He doesn't care whether the parent is positioned or not. It always using screen to calculate offset there like that. So anytime you are dealing with fixed positioning, so and you are using offset, the offset will be calculated based on the screen, not based on the parent or the body. So the difference between the body and the screen, they are not the same thing. The difference between the body and the screen. So it will be always be using screen, and whatever you place it to, it will never leave that side. That's fixed. It will be fixed to that particular side. So here, if I use left now, he's using the screen to calculate it left. Doesn't care about his parent. As you can see, I position the parent, but he's not using it. So he doesn't care about its parent. The only one that care about his parent is absolute. But when you're dealing with fixed, he doesn't care about his parent. Wherever you place it, that's where it's going to stay, and it will never leave that place. It will never leave that place. But you might be wondering, why is this one now at the top? It's not at the back of the other content. That's another property on its own to move content or to place content on top of each other. But for now, we are only focusing on positioning property. So if I use left of 0, it means you want it to be on the left. So 0 now, you see that it's sticking to the browser. It's only going to stick to the browser on the left side. If you mention right, it's going to stick to the 0 of the right there. And so can you see now, it's not using the parent, it always uses the string. And wherever you place it, that's where it's going to stay. So if I want it to stick to the right too, I just need to mention right of 0, whether it's 0 or 0 rem or 0 pixels, all of them are the same thing. So 0 rem is 0 pixels, and it's still the same thing as 0. So here now, what I'm saying is that the elements should be positioned on the left, stick to the left, and at the same time stick to the right hand side, because 0 means it must be fixed to that particular offset that you are talking about. So since left is 0, it's sticking to the left here, and since right is 0, you see that it will be here too once this thing is done loading there, but it's still loading. And once it's done loading there, you'll see that it will be on the right side too when it's done. Browser, what are you loading? Yeah, so now can you see now? So since I mentioned left to be 0 and right to be 0, it will always be there, and it will not leave. So no matter the content you have inside this your browser, it will always fix to that position that you place the content. So the other one, the last one, is this sticky. So sticky too behave like fix based on how you are using the top offset. So the way sticky work is depending on how you are using the top offset. It doesn't work with the right or left. No, it doesn't use all those one like that. It works with the top offset like that. So um if I use sticky, you will not really see anything by default because the way it's working is switching from static to fixed. That's the job of sticky. Sticky will either be fixed, it will either be static or it will either be fixed. It will either be static or fixed depending on whether your offset here is touching the browser top or not. But it works based on the top offset. So if your top offset, the browser is getting there, it will move from static to fixed. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So let me do this in 3rem. So like this. So if I save it, what I'm saying is that this element by default is going to behave like static. But once it stop here from the browser top is up to 3rem. So once the top of this element from its top here to this browser here, if it is up to 3rem, then start behaving as fixed. That's what this top is doing here. So what I'm saying here is that anytime you're using sticky, what this thing is saying is that once the top of this element is 3rem from the top of the browser, then it will switch to fixed until its parent is outside of the screen. Once its parent is outside of the screen, then it goes with the parent. It doesn't stay like that. It always switch from static to fixed depending on the offset that you are using for the top or the value you are using for the top. So here now, if I scroll, you see that it's scrolling, but once its top is 3rem from the top, can you see it's not scrolling again? The only time it will scroll is when its parent is going outside of the screen. So when its parent is going outside of the screen, then it will switch back again. Let me increase the parent so that you can see this in its action. Let me increase the height of the parent. So the height of the parent should be around 600 pixels. But this one used to switch based on whether you are dealing with based on this offset here. So this sticky, it used to behave like fixed if the top offset is close to the top by this value that you mentioned here. So if it is close and its parent is still on the screen, it will be fixed. So which means it will just stay there. It will not move again. But once the parent started going outside of the screen, then it will follow its parent. It's not like the fixed. If it is fixed, that one is using the offset to calculate where you want to place it. But this top offset is not talking about where you want to place it. It's talking about the distance between the browser top and the element top. So once it's up to this value, it will start behaving. Can you see what is happening? So when it is not up to 3rem, so let me increase it again, maybe to around 4rem, like this. So when it's not up to that value, as you are scrolling, as you can see, it is just static, which means it's moving. But once it gets to that top, as you can see now, it will start behaving like fixed until its parent moves outside of the screen. So once you see that its parent is moving outside of the screen, it will now follow suit. And this thing is something you can use when you are dealing with different sections on the page. But anytime you're on that particular page, the title will always be at the top. I will show you what I mean by that later on there. So as you can see, when the top is not up to 4rem, it will just be static. It will be moving. But once it hits this value, it will enter the fixed mode. And once you see that its parent too is going outside, this red now it is parent. Once you see that it's going outside, then it will switch back to the other one, which is the static, but it will still maintain it. It will follow its parent automatically like this. And this is what we call sticky. And this sticky is very important in some areas that you want your title to always stay on as long the parent is inside that particular or is inside the screen. And once the parent is outside of the screen, then that one too should kind of leave the stuff. Let me see if I can find a site that is currently using it like that, because there's some sites that are using it and there's some sites that are not using it. They are using fix, because that same thing you can do it with fix. The problem with fix is that fix will always stay at that position. It will never leave at all. Fix will always be at the top. Well, I can't find it now, but once I get a site that is using that sticky, I will bring it up. But look at this site now. Look at this content here. As you can see, as I'm scrolling up or down, that content is still there. So this is what we call fixed here. So this one is fixed because it's not moving from that position. And you too now, based on this positioning property, you can do something like that, like position element to one particular area and it will never leave that side. For example, now on the page, I can create the element that is going to do something like that. So let me quickly generate the element after this URL. So I'm going to create a button. I will give it a class fix like this so that I can target it from the CSS. Let it load. Will I be able to explain grade? Because I think I will have to shift the grade to another class because it is 1 hour something already. I don't want this thing to be longer than this because the size, I don't want it to be more than 200 MB. So that okay, so inside this one now, I will have this plus icon. So if I use this plus text, so I will save it, go to the CSS. So what do we want to do? We want to position the stuff to this bottom left here. And as you are scrolling, that element will always be at that particular position there. So how do you do it? Is this positioning property. So let's target the element. I have an element with this particular class. So I'm going to give you a background which is going to be blue background. The color is going to be white. The font size, because I want the text to be bigger than the way it is, because the text is just going to be tiny text, which is 16 pixels. But here now I want it to be around 54 pixels, like this. I want it to have a padding of around 2 rem. I want this thing to be bigger. I want the height to be 30. Let me use 40 pixels. Then the width too to be the same because I want to turn it to circle. Anytime you want to turn anything to circle, don't forget I mentioned it last time. The height and the width are going to be the same. Then the border radius there is now going to be 50%. So which is going to turn it to circle so that it's going to look like the way it is on that side. Then I want it to be a pointer. So the cursor like this should just be pointer. So which means anytime you're on top of the element, it's going to show you that it's something that is clickable there like that. And if I save this in now, we should have the elements there. So where is it? Where's my element? The other page is still loading. Okay, look at it here. Oh, I've not positioned the stuff. So yeah, what do we need to do? I need to display it as flex because the content here is supposed to be at the center. Where is placing in there? I don't know. So display flex. And once I display as flex, I can align items to center, which means vertically it will center it, then justify content, which is going to be centered too. That means the element is going to be centered both in the horizontal and vertical axis. Then what do we need to do now? We now need to position. What type of position we need to use? Fix, because we don't want it to move at all wherever we position it. And don't forget, anytime you're using fix, the calculation of your offset is based on the screen, not based on the parent. Even though it's inside this particular parent right now, since I've already positioned it, it will move to wherever I use with this offset. So I want it to be by this side. So that is left. So the left should be around that 1 rem. So which means from the left, it's going to move. So this is what I want to do here. So from the left, it's going to move here by 1 rem. And from the bottom, it's going to move up by 1 rem. Don't forget, when you're using positive, it's moving away from the offset side that you are talking about. So since I mentioned left here, and it is positive, it's moving away from the left side. The same thing too, I'm going to use bottom here. So and the bottom too is going to be of the same value, which is this 1 rem like this. And if I save it, you see that the element now will be fixed to that position that I mentioned. Can you see now? So from the left, it is 1 rem. From the bottom, it is 1 rem. And if you scroll, it will only maintain that particular position there, which is like something that this site is using there. And again too, you can do this. Can you see this dot too? Can you see this one that is on top of it? This is positioning here. So in order for you to be able to move the element to this edge here, you're still going to position it. So let me do that one too. Let me do that one too. I'm going to put it center that button. So position is very, very important when you need to move your element around to different area on the page there. So I'm going to do this one too. I'm going to create a, I'm just going to create a span there. So inside this span, that's where I will just put one. That one now is what I will now move on top here. So I will move it here. But in order for you to move it here now, what I will be using there is absolute position, because the stuff is depending on its parent, because it's going to be offsetting based on the parent. And since it's going to be offset based on its parent, then we need to use absolute. Don't forget, absolute is depending on whether its parent is positioned or not. So if the parent is positioned apart from static, it will be using the parent to calculate offset. But if the parent is not positioned at all, then it's going to use body. And here now, you know that it's going to use this button to calculate the offset, because I've already positioned it as fixed. And since that is positioned as fixed, then it's going to be using it to calculate its offset. Currently now, it will not happen like that. The element is just going to be inside it. So let me, can you see what it's showing? The element is inside it. But this is not what I want. I want this thing to be positioned at the top here, at the edge. So what do you do? So we select that element. So inside the fix, we have span. So what do we want to do? I want to give it a background of red like this. The color should be white like this. Then the font size of this one should be smaller than that plus. So the font size of this one is just going to be 16, or just going to be, let me use 0.75 RAM, which is 12 pixels. So now this one too is going to have its own height and width, because I want to turn it to circle. So this one is going to have 20 pixels. Then the width too is going to be 20 pixels, like this. Then the border radius is going to be 50%, like this. So we need to position it. Position is going to be absolute, because I want it to be based on the offset of this parent. So if I move the parent to another place later on, it should move along with the parent. That's the absolute. Absolute always go with whatever the offset of the parent here. Can you see now? It is here, but I need to offset it to the proper area that I want. But first, let me display it as flex so that I can move that one to the center. So display flex, and how do you move to the center? You get the gist. You align items to center, and at the same time you justify content to center. So it's going to position whatever that's inside it to the center, like that. And if I save it, you see that one should be at the center of that red box. So one should be at the center of that red box. Yeah, as you can see. So what do we now need to do? We need to move it. Okay, I've already positioned it as absolute. So what I just need to do now is to offset it. So where did I want to move it to? This is the parent now, because you need to know how the parent is structured. So if you have to look at the parent as a box, you are going to see that this is the left of the this is the right of the parent, and this is the top of the parent. If you are looking at it as a box, this is the top and this is the left. But I want to move this thing diagonal to this area there. So what I don't need to do now is that work with the right and at the same time work with the left. But I need to use negative value, because you are pulling towards the side that you are mentioning there. So here now, what we need to use is at the top. For the top, I need to use minus, I don't know the value that is going to take it there, but for now, let me just text minus 1 rem. And for the right, I'm going to use minus 2, because it's going towards to that side. So no, don't forget, this is 0, but I want to move it outside a little bit. So it's going to be around that point. Let me just use 25 rem, which is 4 pixels. So that is going to be minus 4 pixels. But here now is going to move it up by minus 16 pixels. And if I save it now, you see that this thing is going to go up in a diagonal, because I'm talking about the top and right at the same time. So it's going to balance it, which is going to be in the diagonal side of this, your left and the at the top and the right rather. So once this thing is done loading, you see that it will move to that side. Can you see? So the top is much, so I need to reduce it. So let me use around that 0.5 rem, and that's what you do until you see that it is okay. No, it's still much. Let me use 0.5 like this, and you see that it will be placed at that particular location now. So with the help of our absolute position now, we are able to do something like this. Let me move it down to, it's too much. Let it be 0.25. It will just be 2525, so that it will still be inside a little bit, like that. So this app positioning is really powerful, because that's what you'll be using to move element to different area on your page. Which one are you not going to use is depending on what you are doing. So if you know that this thing will not move for wherever you want to position it to, you use fix. You use fix. But if you know that this thing, it will be removed from its parent, but you want to position it based on its parent, then you use absolute. But don't forget, absolute doesn't use its parent by default. That parent must have been positioned apart from static. If the parent is not positioned apart from static, then it will not use the parent. It will go and look for another parent inside that parent, the immediate parent that is position. And if none of them is position, it will be using body. The reason why you see that it's calculating it based on this circle here is because we already position it as fixed. Don't forget, absolute to work with any other position apart from static. So it doesn't care whether you are using relative, or you are using absolute, or you are using fixed, or you are using sticky. It will work. It will be using that parent to calculate the offset. But if the parent is static, it will never use that parent at all. And if I move here, it will always stay at that particular position. Look at this design now. So in order for you to be able to do this design, you need position property. Without position property and offset, you cannot do the design, because flex cannot help you to move content like this. Grid cannot help you to move content like this. It's only position property that you're going to be using to do something like this, or to do something like what you are seeing on this side here. As I'm moving, the content is not moving. The same thing too when you're on mobile. When you're on mobile, what is going on here is absolute positioning. So if I click on this thing, you see that everything that is up here, they are now covering the entire screen, and it's not moving. You cannot move at all. This is fixed going on here like that. So absolute the positioning is very important, because when you want to move some element, look at this element, look at this the stuff that is drawn on top of this hidden. It is absolute that it is the positioning that is working here. This thing now, how did they place this image on top of this text? What is going on there is positioning. So if you check the code for this side, you see that they are positioning the image on top of this content by using absolute, because you want it to be based on this content. And since you want it to be based on the content, it means you need to use absolute. Anytime you want to shift element around, or you want the movement of it to be based on its parent, you always use absolute. But if you know that this element is not based on its parent, it's just based on the screen and it will never leave, you use fix. And again too, we have a sticky that I don't have any site to showcase that one for now, but once I see the site, or when it get to a particular design that requires that one, I will bring it out there. So let me, why is this thing loading? Okay, let me scroll back there, and if I check the CSS that is going on there, you see that what they are using is just positioning property to place that image on top of the content. Without positioning property, you cannot place the image on the content. So, or another way of doing it is by using margin to shift, but using margin is not really effective, because you are creating unnecessary space. Because every time you use margin, it's creating a space, not that you are removing. But you know, when you're dealing with position of absolute, that one doesn't have any space at all, but you can still move it around anywhere you want it to be. Look at this dream here. So if you look at the dream, there is something that is under it. So how is this thing placed under the dreams? Is because that dreams, that element is being positioned as relative, and the content that is inside it is being positioned. Can you see here? So the position is relative. Once I remove this position as relative, can you see that that thing is not showing again? Because the element doesn't know about its parent. So once you position the parent, and whatever that is inside it, you position it as absolute, you can move it around anywhere you want it like this. And as you can see, the image is being loaded. Can you see the background, the image now? And it's being placed at the bottom of the element. Position is very important. Anytime you need to move any element to odd area on the page, you're always going to use position it, use the position property to do that. Look at all these things. All these one that you are seeing here, they are positioned to be at this particular location. Not that you just can't move this element here. It's because it is positioned. And that positioning now is depending on its parent. Because if you look at it, as I'm scrolling, it's scrolling with the other content. But if it is not scrolling now, you know that that is absolute there. And it will never leave that particular area on the page. So position is very important. The next class, we put it together, and once we have a design that requires grid, I'll bring that one. It's almost 1 hour 30 minutes, and this thing I don't want it to be longer. Can you see what is going on? So this now is positioned as absolute. Then once you position it as absolute, you can now move it or you can offset it to any location you want. The same thing with this one. It is positioned like this. So if you don't position it, you will not be able. Can you see? So it is positioned. Then the top is 125 pixels. That means from its original parent, you are shifting it down. Don't forget, positive value is coming down, while negative is going towards that side. The left is 0, so which means you are placing it to the left side, and position must be there. You must position as absolute. If I put this in, it will not work again. Can you see? It will go back to this is original location, but because of this position of absolute now, you can move it around to anywhere you want it to be, like that. So any question before we call it a day?
Sir,
Yeah, let
hello,
me
sir.